we will hear the presentation about biographical or thematic approaches of serial transnational world heritage. And I will invite Professor Jörg Haspel from Germany. He graduated in architecture and urban planning. He's an architect and urban planner. From 2012 to 2021, he was president of ICOMOS Germany. And since 2014, he's chairing the board of trustees of the German Foundation for Monument Protection. And he's a permanent member, Jörg is a permanent member of the expert group on urban heritage conservation of the federal government in Germany, and the founding member of the International Scientific ICOMOS Committee on the 20th Century Heritage Preservation. He's a teacher and a researcher, and of course he can contribute to the topic of Erich Mendelsohn, great work. So please, Jörg.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction, and thank you very much for being invited to the Technion. Yesterday we heard about schools of architecture, and one school of architecture which is also internationally renowned is the Technion, and I'm very glad to be here before you celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Technion, which was founded in 1924 next year. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing the whole meeting here and the conference and the excursion and also the accompanying and following discussion. I think it is a big event for us, not only to have an online meeting, but to have a real personal meeting with delegations from Spain, from the US, of course from Poland, of course from other European countries. That's really great, and I'm very thankful. I would like to talk about World Heritage and the question of a thematic or biographical approach. And first of all, I will put up the question thematic or biographical approaches. Then I would talk about my experiences with World Heritage sites and nominations in Germany. I will skip the third chapter, Modern World Heritage in Germany, and the updating of the German tentative list, and come to a closing chapter on filling the gaps with modern World Heritage proposals by the work of Erich Mendelsohn. World Heritage Transnational serial nominations embody the essence of the spirit of the World Heritage Convention, the principle of the universal value of heritage for humankind, and the role of transnational cooperation in the recognition and conservation of the world's heritage. This is how ICOMOS Europe recently summed up its experience with the nomination and management of multinational World Heritage sites. At present, however, only a neglectable number of World Heritage sites meets these high expectations. Only 43 of 1,154 World Heritage sites, or just under 5%, are currently registered as transboundary properties, while a multiple cultural heritage sites accounts even less than 24 of 890 entries. So the vast majority of World Heritage procedures may stimulate cross-border understanding and cooperation, but they do not require transboundary cooperation. However, as we have already learned, an estimated 1/3 of the World Heritage sites are serial nominations. That means multi-part nominations that are not supported by 2 or more nations or signatory states, but composed of several physically separated components on a local level, on a regional level, or on a national level. We already saw the works of Gaudi and, for example, the townhouses of Victor Horta in Belgium. And there are other examples in Europe which are comparable. This is true on a national level for the 3 Bauhaus sites in Germany or the 8 buildings in the US by Frank Lloyd Wright. And a totally new dimension geographically and also to the complexity was the World Heritage Series, which has previously been inscribed by the works of Le Corbusier with 17 objects, as we learned already, in 7 countries and on 3 continents. The architectural work of Le Corbusier, an outstanding contribution to the modern movement, was perceived as a signal and an encouragement for multilateral reorientation of the World Heritage Policy, especially for modern heritage. And I think it was one of the motives for our initiative to think about Erich Mendelsohn. At a first glance, one would like to think, at least when looking through this list of UNESCO registered, that serial World Heritage initiatives for monuments and sites of modernism from the 20th century follow a biographical or monographic approach more often than for earlier centuries. They define the representative cross-section of outstanding masterpieces or aim to document the world significant concentrate of a life's work like Antoni Gaudi, Victor Horta, Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier, but they are incomparable with the inscription of serial heritage sites of previous epochs. You mentioned, Pierre-François, you mentioned Vauban and Palladio, but you also must be aware that Vauban, that is a typology of building. These are fortresses of the Baroque area, so it's not only about Vauban. And in the case of Palladio, these are the Palladian villas, so it is a stylistic and regional approach which led to the inscription. Critical UNESCO and e-commerce observers can argue, and they have argued, that the 20th century seems to distinguish itself more than earlier epochs through a kind of whip list, a very important person list of world-famous modernist architects, and inscribe itself in the world heritage or in the collective memory of mankind instead of tracing the significance of the last century on the basis of most influential movements and achievements. So they leave behind something like a who is who of 20th century modern architecture, instead of getting to the bottom of epochal inventions and improvements and developments like war, like colonialism, like mass media, like mass transport, like electronics, aerospace, electrification, and so on and so on. Mockers are joking that the list of Pritzker Prize winners should be possible serve as a global tentative list for future nominations. Even those who do not share this polemical reproach of name-dropping or star cult may understand the question of what contribution can be provided by a biographically motivated heritage series. How do they contribute to a better understanding of the last century, and even how do it geographically to a chronologically, typologically or thematically more balanced UNESCO list. For example, the GAP report, which has already been mentioned, of e-commerce, was an important impulse for the representative reorientation of UNESCO's World Heritage Policy in 2009. The analysis, written in 2000 or between 2002 and 2004, speaks of 3 complementary frameworks categories, that is, the typological framework, approved in the definition of cultural heritage, a chronological regional framework, that means time and space related, and a thematic framework, which means the response of people to cultural environment and to changing challenges of the environment. There is no biographical evaluation mentioned or recommended. Here you see the frameworks which I already presented to you. And what applies in general to World Heritage has apparently also recently found an expression in the consideration of monument values and World Heritage potentials of the 20th century. The newest study prepared by the Getty Conservation Institute in cooperation with the 20th Century Heritage committee of ICOMOS, which is called the 20th Century Historic Framework, a tool for assessing heritage places, and that means also for assessing World Heritage places and candidates. It focuses exclusively on the last century, only on the 20th century, and distinguishes a spectrum of 10 sectors to which the heritage of modernism can be assigned. Obviously, a biographical perspective of investigation and selection does not promise much gain or an additional benefit in identifying and promoting underrepresented categories in the World Heritage List. Also, the proven instrument of the comparative, the so-called thematic bibliographies and studies as they were represented here, which is preferred by ICOMOS for the exploration of World Heritage gaps, does not yet know an access via the global evaluation of artists, architects, engineers or other creators' biographies and oeuvre catalogues, at least not among the 26 thematic studies which have already been published so far until 2021. My following case study is based on the analysis and experience with the nomination and management of World Heritage Sites of 20th century in Germany, with a special focus on Berlin-Brandenburg. And the current procedure for updating the German list may offer an opportunity to discuss it more timely today. But unfortunately, we have to confess that Erich Mendelsohn's architecture of dialogue, as we have labeled our meeting here today, is not yet on the current proposal list of the Federal States of Germany. And so far, Erich Mendelsohn's name is also not mentioned in Israel's tentative list with, I think, 15 nominees up to date, and nor in any other tentative list worldwide. It should be noted that in advance that 51 heritage sites are currently listed in the Federal Republic of Germany, and 48 of which are cultural properties. At least about 20% are part of a transboundary World Heritage Site, and about 20% or more than 15% are attributable to the modern era of 20th century heritage. Some of them have already been presented. The World Heritage profile of the Federal Republic is thus more multinational and younger than the vast majority of the 194 signatory states of the World Heritage Convention. And you see Germany is also sharing the works of Le Corbusier with 2 villas in the Weißenhof-Siedlung in Berlin, in Stuttgart, sorry. And by comparison, you see here, these are the World Heritage Sites of Israel, and it is only the white city of Tel Aviv, which belongs totally to the 20th century and to modern heritage. The Bauhaus sites of Weimar and Dessau, which comprises 7 components and which are located in 3 different eastern states. They represent something like a regional World Heritage series of modernism, and they are highly regarded also abroad. It covers, as you can see here, the Bauhaus site in Weimar, the Bauhaus in Dessau itself, and the Bauhaus School, or the School of the Trade Union in Bernau, in Brandenburg. And it covers, as it also was already mentioned, the work of Walter Gropius, the founding director, as well as the work of Hannes Meyer, his successor. As a local World Heritage series, 6 Berlin modernism housing estates have been inscribed in the World Heritage List in 2008. They are covering the development of social housing, not of housing architecture or residential architecture, of social housing and urban planning reform in the span of World War I up to the Great Depression in 1930. And they are located in 7 different boroughs or 7 different districts, and 7 different conservation authorities are responsible, and at present they are owned by 2 building societies or housing companies, a privately bought and joint stock and real estate company, and a non-profit building company and housing cooperative founded in 1892. With regard to our conference topic, one could ask about the role of Erich Mendelsohn for the Berlin World Heritage settlements. It is well known that he made notable contributions in the field of modern housing architecture during the Weimar Republic, and furthermore, Mendelsohn is mentioned among the founding members of the November Gruppe. As it was mentioned yesterday, he was involved in the activities of the so-called Arbeitsrat für Kunst, the Working Council for Art, and he belonged also to the Zehnerring, to the Ring architects, who were responsible for the housing estate Siemensstadt, which also is nicknamed as Ringsiedlung because of its architects who were involved. The name of designers responsible for UNESCO housing estates in Berlin reads like a list of champions of Berlin's avant-garde architecture in the golden 20s, but the list sounds also exclusive. So much that even the founding Ring member, Erich Mendelsohn, is missing. His name does not appear among the modern architects of social housing organized by the municipal and social democratic city administration. Erich, thank you very much. Erich Mendelsohn's spacious complex, Avoga complex, is also not inscribed because it was a private investment and also other reasons. So now I will skip a chapter and come to the closing chapter, filling the gaps. Among the gaps that stand out from a German perspective and a biographical approach to the World Heritage List and all the 186 national tentative lists, the name Erich Mendelsohn has been missing for some times. After all, it was an architect whose buildings, as well as his sketches and publications, served as a guiding light for the building production in the last century and still exerts a strong fascination today. His architectural practice was not only considered to be the largest in Europe during the interwar period, only Albert Kahn's office is comparable with about 600 collaborators, but many famous architects from all over the world passed through his school, or if you not want to call it school, his atelier, his office, and some of these buildings were considered icons of a expressionist or dynamic or organic modernist architecture during the interwar years. It was only one generation ago when the so-called Docomomo tentative list of Hubert and Henket recommended the nomination of Mendelsohn's Delaware Pavilion in the United Kingdom. But the input was ignored by the state parties responsible for nomination. And a decade later, it was ICOMOS and TICI, the International Council on the Conservation of Industrial Heritage, Germany. They submitted the proposal to nominate the Einstein Tower in Potsdam as a masterpiece of expressionist or organic modernism, but also as an outstanding technical and scientific heritage site of the 20th century astrophysical research, which is linked to the name of Albert Einstein. This initiative also remained without any resonance within the responsible state authorities. So this suggestion was taken up again in an extended form as a binational initiative of Docomomo, of ICOMOS, Germany and Israel, 1 decade later, and with an impulse contribution, Erich Mendelsohn, Work and World Heritage. Regina Stephan presented the complex works of Erich Mendelsohn and the idea of an international serial nomination, not of a nomination of the Einstein Tower or of the Delaware Pavilion, but to combine it. It was presented on the International Day of Monuments and Sites in 2021. The response on our call for projects was overwhelming, and a quickly formed Erich Mendelsohn Initiative Circle was soon joined by colleagues from all over the world. and we started 2 days. And you see here, the Erich Mendelsohn Initiative Circle is not a women power initiative, but without the women power, we would not have the Erich Mendelsohn Initiative Circle. A 2-day online workshop in July 2021, in which experts from Europe and the Middle East and the Americas characterized all surviving buildings attributed to Erich Mendelsohn or to his office with World Heritage assessments, were presented and formed a kind of prelude and prepared a checklist which looked like this. It was the checklist which was following the requirements of the World Heritage Convention and of the operational guidelines. Here is the example of the checklist for the Trade Union House building in Berlin. This was followed in March last year on the occasion of the birthday of Erich Mendelsohn by a hybrid conference entitled Positioning Erich Mendelsohn and the Built Heritage of the 20th Century. And one result of the presentations and discussions was the insight that also Erich Mendelsohn's life work and international charisma were significantly characterized by the Berlin years with the sketches and buildings of a dynamic metropolitan architecture. You can call it as a kind of expressionist or organic architectural modernism. They can be concentrated or even shorted to the 20s. In this respect, not only the title pages and cover images of many publications on his life and work, but also the selection of images and buildings in some encyclopedic and web contributions contain a misunderstandable accentuation and a web in the sense of the self-biography and the self-interpretation of modern movement and the architectural historiography of the 20th century. And this was already let down maybe during Erich Mendelsohn's lifetime and through his own publications, which were, of course, disseminated and accepted worldwide. Perhaps one would like to ask, in retrospect, from the 21st century back to the 20th century, what is the characteristic life achievement? And I think it consisted in the ability of an almost universal development and application of his dialogical design principles under the condition of a repeatedly forced emigration. This is not primarily a broad repertoire of possible design variants, but above all the ability to react to the most diverse requirements with specific, as a result, distinctive answers and to create something like identity. Yesterday we learned about memorability, and these are always or often very memorable places. So it's for me, it's not a question of, let's call it, a virtuous creativity or a toolbox of typified model or modules which can be used to answer all questions all over the world sufficiently, but it is the ability to create a contemporary architecture of appropriateness. Erich Mendelsohn can be estimated as a hero of interwar modernism. We know him as a hero of interwar modernism, but he also can be interpreted and counted under the early and outstanding universal pioneers and most influential companions of modern diversity or of diverse modernity. That is a label which should or could be also attributed to Mendelsohn. The initial consideration of compiling a cross-section collection best of Erich Mendelsohn, similar to the World Heritage proposal of Le Corbusier, has proved to be problematic. On the one hand, because of methodological reasons, because World Heritage Convention is a site-based convention whose binding reference to site and fabric should not be challenged or even replaced by other criteria. Secondly, because significant works of Mendelsohn, especially from his Berlin period, have either been completely lost due to the bombs of war and post-war ignorance, or they are rudimentarily preserved as a Mosse house, or as we also saw yesterday, the Universum Cinema and the Voga complex. Thirdly, because even preserved key buildings of Mendelssohn's have not yet been able to obtain the consent of the owners and stakeholders concerned, and a few of them are not expected at all to get green light from the owner sides or administration in a short time. At present, this applies in particular to the private house of Mendelsohn, but also, for example, to the Russell House in San Francisco, and also to military plants and research plants in Israel and US. What remains, however, could be depicted in a concentrated and credible way with a selection of best preserved, that is not the same, best preserved and best accessible examples is not the same as the best of list of Mendelssohn. The best preserved and the best accessible Mendelssohn buildings in a handful countries in the UNESCO region of Europe, North America and Israel. This is one UNESCO region which is brought together here. All of them can be understood as the subject of flight and expulsion, or the fate of forced immigration to which the Jew Erich Mendelsohn had to react repeatedly and multiple times on his life journey through Europe, mandatory Palestine to the US. And I show you here a map which I received from Iran, and I'm so thankful for this wonderful map, because here you see the stations, and now you see from Poland or from Germany, he went to the United Kingdom, he had to go to mandatory Palestine, and from Palestine he went to the US. That is the way of expulsion, and that are stations of his life and of his works and of his architecture. So thus, the unifying origin of the clients and users as part of the Jewish community among non-Jews often played a decisive role. It served and it provided a tradition of perception as an eternally wandering Jews, as well as the pattern of an interpretation of Jewish diaspora. And here you see the map with the, yes, I know, and this is the second last, and this is the last slide. In addition to buildings of the sepulchral and sacred culture, such as early works of Bet Tahara in Olsztyn, or the synagogues in US, thank you very much, Mike Palmer, for the presentations and for the book. The War Pavilion in Bexhill, or the Schocken Library, maybe in Jerusalem, and special buildings like the Einstein Tower with the Institute of Astrophysics, or the Weizmann House, they are particularly very impressive representations of Erich Mendelsohn's design philosophy for a distinctive embedding and contextual design on this heritage of his buildings in the sense of a genius loci. The Erich Mendelsohn project is a work in progress, and so my lecture also sees itself as a further step towards this work in progress. With the last year's symposium in Berlin and this year's Haifa symposium, we have laid a foundation stone, or maybe two foundation stones, that should be followed by further building blocks, if possible, in Poland next year and in the US in 2025. The Erich Mendelsohn Initiative is welcoming advice, criticism and support. All experts and parties interested in the ongoing process are cordially invited to join the online meetings and the workshops, or even better, to attend and assist the next birthday of Erich Mendelsohn on the birthplace of Erich Mendelsohn, if Professor Boguslav Śmigin, the president of ICOMOS Poland and the president of the World Heritage Committee of Poland, and Cornelia Gorowska from the Borussia Foundation, if they are calling us. Thank you very much.